Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to another IPDAY Webinar Wednesday. Today, we're going to talk about data. Talk data to me, processes, procedures, and people. I'm really glad all of you are with us today. Our discussion is really going to focus on ways that we are going to look at how we can improve our adult education programs' performance and student outcomes. We're going to do this by analyzing processes, procedures, and people. So I want to welcome our facilitators to our presentation today. Yolanda Flores, who is the Administrative Director of Post-Secondary Adult and Community Education at Lorenzo Walker Technical College. She is joined in today with Ariel Pachokas, who is the Assistant Director of Post-Secondary Adult and Community Education at Lorenzo Walker College. Just a few little housekeeping rules before we start. You know you are all on listen-only mode, and today's presentation has already been downloaded on the IPDAY website, and any additional supplementary materials that we are going to discuss today, we will load them in the archives on the IPDAY website. So the recorded version will be available within 48 hours. And I hope you all enjoy this webinar. We have a lot to talk about as it relates to data and improving our program outcomes. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Yolanda and Ariel and thank them for the presentation today.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, and thank you for joining us on this wonderful presentation on data. In a previous life, I was a high school principal, and I was responsible for taking a high school that was graded at a C level all the way to an A level within 1 year. Of course, that could not have been done without looking at data, and then also taking into account the team of individuals that I had, from the assistant principals on down to the teachers, the students, and the parents. So everyone working towards the same outcome of improving our outcomes by looking at our data and see what we needed to do. One of the very first things I discovered is that we were leaving points on the table by simply not taking action. And so today, that's why we're going to talk about processes and some of the things that you can do in taking action. But before I continue, Ariel, can you share what individuals will walk away with by the end of the session?
Well, thank you for having us here again. And so we're looking at taking a big picture of understanding data accountability, understanding our NRS tables, especially the table 4, which is what we're using to kind of see our progress and monitor that. We're looking at our processes here internally at Lorenzo Walker and in Collier County with our data collection, monitoring that data, and reporting the data. The procedures we've gone through, revisiting and revising on an ongoing basis, reflecting on those local processes and the roles that everybody plays. And at the end, really looking at opportunities to reflect on your local process, next steps, in those procedures, and how do we really move a program from where we are to where we want to be. And then it'll open up for some Q&As.
So let's start first by taking a poll, and let's see if you know what the state holds us, the districts and the state colleges, accountable for when it comes to our ESOL and ABE data. So there's going to be a poll that's launched for the first question, and then we'll come back to the other 2 questions.
So we're going to be looking at 3 main questions, and as we release the poll, now what you're going to see pop up on your screen is what the first question. Feel free to respond to it, and as we go through that one, we'll look at what the responses were, and we'll talk a little bit about it, and then we'll move on to the next. So we have 3 poll questions.
Okay, we can close the first poll and see the results.
And June, maybe you can walk me through it a little bit because we're not able to see the results or the poll on this side. So if you can help us a little bit. Hopefully we got to the point where.
So you have the answer as D, all of the above. 88% of the people
Yes.
answered D.
Excellent. So we're all kind of on the same page that in reference to the first question of what are we held accountable for, we're held accountable on two measures. One is post-test rate, and two is the individual ABE measurable skill gains and our ESL measurable skill gains. And that's coming from the state. So we'll release the second question. How is post-test rate calculated?
And that's going to appear on your screen. And then if you can take a moment to answer that question, we will then share the results. How is post-test rate calculated? If you can take a minute to answer that, we'll give you about 60 seconds and then we'll release the results.
So as we release the results, hopefully we're saying that the correct answer is B. We're looking at all students with 10 instructional hours, recognizing that the state gives us those two for testing purposes and maybe orientation that are scheduled into an eligible NRS program who have post-tested, and that's then divided by the total number of those NRS eligible students.
Right. So this is one area where you can leave points on the table simply by not having a pulse on those individuals, making sure that they're post-testing. So you always want to keep an eye on your enrollment, and then out of those, how many actually make it to that post-test?
And then let's go ahead and release question number. Yes, June?
Oh no, 66% got that right.
Excellent.
Okay.
And then let's go ahead and release poll question number 3. And that is, how is MSG calculated?
Okay, let's just pull up the results.
And so the correct response here would have been B, that it's 1 LCP per student per WITIS year divided by the total number of students enrolled for that program. And here's where it gets a little bit more complicated. And June, I'm not sure what the results were.
Yeah, it's all across the board. So you've got 35% on A, B is at 39%, and C is 26%. And no one answered D. So you may want to, since we're across the board on this, you might need some more explanation.
Yeah, and again, I'll kind of cover it briefly, but again, without getting too far into the weeds with it today, I think IPDA a few months back, back in December of 2019, you, June, with the help of Maria from Miami-Dade, did a fantastic job putting together the 4 critical factors that impact your NRS data. And that one, that webinar and resource toolkit had a lot of resources that really broke this apart. And that would be a great reference that is included in the end of this PowerPoint presentation as well. But really briefly, when we're looking at measurable skill gains, and that's MSG for measurable skill gains, not for what we have that we typically find in some Chinese food. We're talking about measurable skill gains here. We're looking at, for a student who is enrolled in the eligible program, whether it's a ELL, ESOL, or ABE reading or math or language, we're looking at that student per that enrollment period, and whether they earned 1 LCP. And we're talking about NRS reporting data. So in that time frame, how many students did you have enrolled in that particular program, and that is divided by the number of post-tested students, or I'm sorry, the number of LCPs that were awarded.
So within an ESOL program, Ariel, can you tell us what that would include? So
in the ESOL program, and again, if things change from year to year from the state, and so most recently, we will schedule a student in an ESOL program based on their pre-test scores, typically in reading and listening. And based on those pre-test scores, we will provide instruction, and at the end of those 70, 80 hours of instruction, we'll post-test a student. So now I have one student who was registered in my class that post-tested, and I have earned an LCP. Perhaps the student made a measurable skill gain growth, an LCP, literacy completion point, in reading, or perhaps it was in listening. And so it doesn't have to be in both. We're just looking at one area of growth, and then that growth, that performance is claimed. And so when we claim that LCP, that's that measurable skill gain that we're comparing, that the student earned at least one during his enrollment or her enrollment time.
and that would be for functioning levels 1 through 6.
For functional levels 1 through 6, correct.
Right, and then for ABE, it would be for functioning levels 1 through 4.
Exactly. So for the ABE world, we're looking at that ABE student because when they get to the NRS levels 5 and 6, they are now scheduled typically into a GED program, and the GED is not an eligible test for a post-test rate.
Right. So again, those explanations are part of that understanding the stick that we are beaten with. And as you know, with that one, that people have a little bit of difficulty confusing, it is very confusing. Here at the local level, Ariel and I and the team have had a lot of conversation around that very same topic. So the more that you talk and decipher it, the better you will have an understanding of it. So it's important to understand what NRS is looking for, understand the NRS calendar, and then you always have to be questioning your data. Is it correct? Because if it's garbage in, then it's going to be garbage out. So you have to look at your data and question for its accuracy. And finally, you need to have some tools in place to be able to monitor your data. And when we talk about tools, it might be the student management information system that you use. I know some districts use Focus, but there are other tools that are used out there by our state colleges and other districts. Whatever it is that you use for your management information system, you have to work with it and be knowledgeable enough to work with your programming people to be able to produce the reports that you need to help you monitor your data. Those reports are critical. And then also, not only tools, but the resources. And a critical part of those resources, of course, is human resources, your staff.
So then, if we're really talking about improving our data and our data as far as how the state sees our programs and our performance, we really need to take a step back and take a global picture of what is it that we're looking at. And so if we're looking at improving the measurable skill gains, in order for us to get an LCP, we need to get the student to post-test. And so in order to improve the post-test rate, we have to make sure we have those systems in place to ensure that we capture that. But before that, we need to make sure that we've retained the student long enough to post-test them. And the only way that we are able to do that is, again, going back to ensuring that we are providing that purposeful and relevant instruction to the student. And so if those pieces are in place, we know the post-test rate will be there, and we know that if we can test the student in a timely basis, we know our performance will also increase.
So when Ariel and I inherited the adult education programs about 4 years ago, that is one of the first things that we did. We looked at our data in terms of NRS reporting and where we were at. And right away, we realized we have a lot of room for improvement. If you look at the 2016-2017 data, our total post-test rate was 39%. That was a combination of ABE and ESOL, which is broken out, and you can see that on the screen. And then our total LCPs were 26%. As you can see, we were nowhere near meeting the outcomes. And of course, that was unacceptable in our eyes. So slowly we started making changes, and we'll talk as we go through the presentation about some of those changes that we put in place. And you can see that we made some growth there from 2016-17 to the 2018-2019 school year. So we went from 39% of our students testing to 56.73% testing. Again, not quite there in meeting outcomes, but we're getting closer. And then with our LCPs from 26% to 32.22%, not quite there. The biggest, and what you can see also then with our total LCPs is that we made progress in reference to ESOL, but ABE kind of remained flatline. And there's a reason why, because as we were making changes, we were focused just on our ESOL program. And so we were moving the needle there, but when it came to ABE, we were really not paying as much attention to it, and therefore it remained flatline. Now, this data is for all of Collier County, the Naples area, as well as the Immokalee area. Towards the end of the presentation, we're going to show you the Naples area data that we're projecting for 2019-2020. And we're able to arrive at that based on some reports that we're able to run through our student information management system.
So, and so as we're going through this, I think some key pieces to keep in mind is with any effort to change a system, to bring in programmatic change both at the data level, at the instructional level, it's a tough shift, a very difficult shift to turn around. And we need to also be critical as we're looking at the data, and while it's not looking as positive as we hope for with all the efforts, you have to also look for those instances that may have impacted the data negatively, not for any other reason, that process might not just be refined yet, but then also exterior factors that could have impacted. An example of this, 2017-18, one thing that we know that impacted our data so it didn't shine as to the level that it could was Irma. Irma impacted us considerably then. That we lost students immediately after Irma, and that was at that post-testing period for us. In 18-19, we had another major shift, and that was the introduction of the new TABE test. And all of those little shifts, or major shifts, impact the data considerably.
Mm-hmm. The other thing before we move on that I want you to notice is look at how our ABE enrollment trended going up and our ESOL enrollment trended going down. Again, that was intentionally by some of the processes that we put in place and that we will speak about. So that moves us, before we move on, are there any questions in the chat box?
And Jude, I might solicit your help if there are some questions. Please interrupt us because we're not able to see it. We're just looking at it one screen. We'll move forward just for the meantime.
Okay. All right, so now let's dive into processes, people, and procedures. And we'll start talking about some of the things that we did when it came to our process. First of all, we started the move from an open entry enrollment to a managed enrollment. So what does that mean? Once upon a time in adult education, if students showed up on a Monday or a Tuesday or Wednesday, guess what? They would be welcome, they would go through a testing process, and next thing you know, they would be enrolled in the program. We decided, we knew we were going to take a hit when it came to our instructional hours, but that was no longer working. And so we established a calendar where we would accept students 5 times a year. And so it averages about every 9 weeks, and it became a managed enrollment. So people could not walk in halfway through and expect to be in class. Now, there were things that we did in between, like putting students through an orientation, testing them, getting them ready for that next window when it opened up. When we first introduced this to our staff, we received a lot of pushback. How can you do this? These individuals are coming when they're able to. We're going to lose a lot of students. You're going to turn people away, etc. But we knew that if we didn't put this in place, then there was no way that we could improve our quality of our program. because one of the things that we noticed also that some students, because it was constantly open enrollment, some very dedicated students would get frustrated because the teacher would have to go back with those new ones coming in and catching them up, that they would leave our program. So that's the first thing that we took action. A lot of pushback, but now if you ask my staff, is manager enrollment working? They would say absolutely yes. We would never go back to an open enrollment. It works for the students, it works for the teachers, it works for program quality.
One of the other pieces we then introduced, and this was the onboarding of a formal of transitioning from an informal onboarding process of instructors to a more formal. And one key way we did this was by bringing on an instructional coach. That instructional coach really scripted out what teachers need to be are expected to do. What does their class day or look like? What's the pacing for their curriculum? And really, what are those best strategies in understanding that the adult learner really needs? How do we make what we're trying to present relevant to the adult learner, and who should be doing most of the talking in these classes, or who should be doing most of the work? And so she is able to bring on board these new instructors, release them slowly, but then always there to be able to assist and refine that practice. Ultimately, providing that piece of continuous support and access for the instructor to best support their students.
Mm-hmm. The other thing that we did is we looked at the way we scheduled students. So we went from a traditional course scheduling to data-driven course scheduling. And so what do we mean by that? Traditionally, students would be scheduled, let's say, in an evening program for 4 nights a week. Well, one of our administrators sat down and analyzed the data, and what he discovered is that most students, even though we were scheduling for 4 nights a week, could not commit to 4 nights a week. Then we looked to see what was the day that students were absent the most, or that there was instruction that was interrupted as a result of holidays or things like that. And we found out it was Monday. So looking at that, we decided, you know what, for our evening programs, we're only going to schedule students for 3 nights a week. And then for our day programming, traditionally students would be scheduled all day for 5 days a week. But again, we knew they were not coming. So we broke it up into sections. So students had a choice to come 3 days a week or 2 days a week. They have a choice to come for a morning session or an afternoon session or a combination. So there's multiple ways that a student can get scheduled depending on when they are available.
So then another big piece we've always struggled with is what we're calling here a data hogging, where really we've always kept our data secret. We kept it a secret from our students because after they would test, they would receive a score of a 210, and we'd say a great job and off on their way and put them in a class, but we never really explained what a 210 or a 193 meant, or what is an NRS 4 or 5. To transitioning to more of a data chats where we've provided the teachers access to run their own reports for their classes so that they can see the detailed aspect of where the students are and what they need as a whole. We started bringing the teachers in together to start seeing what patterns in student learning are occurring and what support mechanisms do we need to start providing as a whole, not just in a classroom, but as a whole in transitioning students from beginning to intermediates to advanced, or from an NRS 2 to a 4 to a 6. And then at the tail end of that, where we are now, is involving the students in that access to their data. Where are they? What does this mean? What does this mean we need to focus on so that we can move further faster?
Mm-hmm. And then from there, regarding the students, involving them in terms of testing and what does it really mean, and giving them plenty of advance warning so that they know when their testing date is coming up, as opposed to them just showing up one night and saying, oh, you're going to go test. Tests tends to shake some people up, but the more that you can prepare them, they can come in comfortably and hopefully well prepared to do well on the test. So we engaged them in that conversation.
We have professional development, and obviously that's all focused around the data and the gaps and the needs of the teachers. And I think we've really found, realized the need for this, especially now as we went and had to pivot to a virtual instructional world. With that said, the last piece of this is really the admin-driven improvement of really involving all stakeholders in the improvement process. Everybody has to realize that they have a critical role in the process or in the place that they are, but they also have to have an understanding of what happens before them, what happens after them, because that's where the breakdown in communication or the breakdown or the loss of data occurs.
So now that we have these processes in place, the next thing is you need to make sure that you have procedures in place. So you can talk about it, you can make the changes, but if you do not list the specific things that are needed and start putting in place your standard operating procedures, then people will naturally revert back to what they're used to. So now this moves us to procedures. It is important to put those procedures in place.
And part of that is having them in writing, having them accessible to others, because one of the biggest challenges we have in adult education across the state, across the country, I would say, is the majority of our staff are part-timers. They're adjuncts. And so that when they come in, we need to start over the whole process and helping them understand that process from beginning to end. And if it's not formalized somewhere, we tend to skip steps or go over pieces, or they don't see the relevance in what they're doing. And so do I really need to check off that box? Why am I doing this?
Can you talk a little bit, Ariel, in terms of that structure of when a student decides to enter the program, how that changed onto the orientation?
So very briefly, as we, in the past, what we would typically do is we would have a orientation, a very quick orientation, and we were very centered about customer service. And so the orientation consisted of welcoming them, letting them know that we have English classes or that GED class, and getting them tested, and then sitting them in class ready, that all in that same day. And while we were really centered about great customer service and moving that student from day one, from walking in through that door and in the same day or the next day starting in class, we realized that we were doing the student a disservice. We were bringing a student in so quickly that they didn't really understand what we were asking them to do and why and how we were going to be supporting them. So we had to slow down our process altogether. Everything to the point of going back to orientation and helping them understand what's expected of them, what can they expect from us, and how does this all, how does the relationship between the student and the institution or the teachers or the program really work in tandem to be able to ultimately meet those data, that data component, because we need them to stake it out to the end for post-testing. Not only that, we also needed to slow down the process to make sure that we weren't rushing through the registration forms and missing key pieces that we had to track down later, because now we were missing pieces that of critical information that would not make the student eligible for NRS purposes. And then finally, we also needed to slow down the process of testing. We tested the student, but guess what? We forgot to verify whether the test was in range or valid. And so we had them sitting in class without a valid test. Now that student, we needed to start back and we're losing instructional hours. So all of those little things really add up to a process or a procedure that needs to be refined.
Right, so anytime we ran into hiccups or something that wasn't working quite right, we would always go back and look at our procedures. Did we follow the procedures, and or was it time to refine it? Because as you're making changes along the way, you put things down and then you find out, you know what, that quite doesn't work. We need to make some changes. Before we move on then to people, are there any questions out there, June?
Yeah, there's a couple of questions. So next report time going over 1920 to 21-22 school year. Can you hear me?
You're breaking in and out.
Joseph, go ahead and read the question.
Question is, so will the next report time going over 19 through 20 to 21-22 school year?
We might be having some technical issues on our side here. We're breaking in and out.
I know it's about the data going forward, but I couldn't hear the end.
What we'll do is we'll keep moving forward. I think we might be addressing a little bit of that data for the 2021 school year towards the tail end of this presentation. And so maybe we'll get better reception then. So then as we transition forward, the last piece are the people. And the people within an institution are critical components. All those different levels, from admin all the way down to the entry level data reception, that receptionist that welcomes that student. And the key piece here is understanding the roles each play in communicating the need for this change, but more importantly, also communicating the need for the change in each individual role and valuing or helping the student, but helping the individuals within your institution understand the impact that they each play. As we look forward into this process, one of the pieces for us was, well, we weren't seeing the results as quickly as we wanted to. We saw little milestones, and those little milestones need to be celebrated. At the data entry level, at the intake person or registrar, all the way up to the level of the instructor who's retaining that student and building that relationship.
But also that needs to be celebrated with students, because students want to be rewarded. Even if it's a certificate, it's an award ceremony. There are many ways that you can do that. It could be at a site-based level. It could be within your classroom. Each community, each school is different. You have to determine what works best for you. But that celebration of success is critical, because then people will continue to try to do their best in order to help you move forward in meeting those outcomes. And then finally, it's refining next steps. What's working, what's not working. And so Ariel, I think, mentioned a little bit earlier in terms of having to refine the orientation of when we went virtual. I know we have possibly individuals out there that when they went virtual, either their enrollment went down, and I know there are some programs that possibly did not have the tools necessary to be able to go virtual. But we were fortunate here in Collier County that we did, but we had to refine the steps because technology now brought in a whole different element. And so Ariel, I know you can speak to how we had to refine those steps with virtual.
Yes. With
or virtual orientations with the students.
Oh, yes.
Them ready for
so where we were doing in-person orientations with our new challenges in the world, having to stop everything physically and go to a virtual platform, we launched our orientations virtually, just like we're doing now, that we're connecting through a Zoom. We're connecting our students through a Zoom, and we're asking all students to connect. And we recognize the barriers and the challenges many of our students may have, not all, but many of our students may have with technology. So we have that accessibility still here on our campus. But we recognize the need that if we're going to continue moving forward with digital literacy and helping them understand that we have programs that are available in a virtual world, we need to introduce them to that virtual world as soon as possible.
Mm-hmm. So it was very time consuming sometimes in working with the students, in that one-on-one, our staff would be guiding the students on how to log in to the tools that were being used. Also, we used that time, since our programs, we did not have a high enrollment, we used that time to really engage our teachers that were not teaching in professional development when it came to the use of technology. Okay, go ahead.
So people critical, I think we've,
Yep.
Okay. So then we get into monitoring, and this is a key one: inspect what you expect. And I think a lot of us have heard of that before. But the key takeaway here are as you're making changes, look for those broken or missing pieces. Look for those opportunities that that are, like Yolanda said before, those points that we leave on the table. What do I mean by that? When I first started, we were doing registrations by paper and pencil. And one of the biggest things I realized quickly is if I went into certain buildings and offices and I started opening up drawers, I might find stacks of registrations in there that weren't processed, or I might find tests that were administered but never entered in the system. Well, now with technology, we like to think, boy, things have gotten so much better. But the reality is now I have these virtual drawers. Now I have to go looking because I'm administering either the TABE online or the CASAS online. Wait a minute, where are those tests sitting? But did those tests actually ever get reported into our MIS system? Where is that registration that I'm doing on wait, there is no paper pencil registration. Where is that registration? So now I have to go digging for those pieces. So there are more things we need to inspect and verify with this virtual platforms that we're using.
So one of the things that, recall our data that we shared earlier in the presentation. And as we were then looking at our data for the 1920 school year, and this was back in January of 20, January of 20, we looked at our data from July 1st through the end of December 2019, right? So then in January, we were looking at our data in terms of post-testing, in terms of gains being made. And we were able to look at that because Ariel, working with one of our programmers from the district, was able to set reports that would kind of mimic the NRS outcomes. And in looking at that data, we noticed, wow, we've done a lot of work, but the data is not showing the work that we've done. It's pretty much flatlining. And I had a very serious conversation with Ariel and another administrator, and I said, wow, for all the changes that we made, it's not paying off. It's still not what we needed. And that's when we really then went into the data mining. What is broken? What is missing? What is it that's not helping us drive that data? And so then Ariel brought together a team of individuals, and you'll see the picture up there. And I think you did this for 2 or 3 days.
Yeah, so we locked ourselves in a conference room, and obviously in a true adult education fashion with food provided, we have to keep the workers, everybody happy. We brought in a team, and the team consisted obviously of an admin group, but in addition to that, we had local site administrators. From there, we also had our data specialist or a compliance specialist from the district. We had our local data entries. We had our proctors in the room as well. And we had our facilitators there as well. All of these individuals starting the conversation of, wait a minute, we need to step back. Something's going on. We know we tested X amount of students, but we're not seeing that in our reports. We know Maria got tested and got an LCP. Why isn't she showing up? We know that we post-tested, but where's that post-test indicator? So different little pieces that we're slowly breaking apart, we're missing. So then from here, we're looking at that data mining, and what does that really consist of? Ensuring at the very beginning that we're collecting that accurate data, and then reflecting on all those pieces. What is critical and what is not? Ensuring that that data was correct, recorded and collected accurately, submitting that data, and then following up. Ultimately reviewing not just what we collected and what we thought we submitted, but when it comes back from the state, reviewing that aspect as well. And we talked a little bit about this, and this is where Yolanda shared that back in January, February last year, we we found some gaps in our data, and so we're going to just move a little bit further along, mining data by individuals.
So go back to the previous one
Sure.
in terms of where we ran comparison reports from Focus on students who had post-tested. So Ariel, can you share some of those reports from Focus? And again, we are aware that some of you do not use Focus. However, start the conversation with your programmers at your site and see what kinds of reports you can run that will help you. Again, Ariel mentioned earlier, we used to do it all paper, pencil, no more. Now it's virtually. And we're going to share some of those reports also in the handout that you received or the link on the IFDA website. You'll have some of that. So, Ariel?
So quickly, some reports that we were able to create, build internally. And these are very strategic, and we started with the very first. The very first being, as we get student enrollments, I need to know my enrollment numbers on a daily basis. Where am I today compared with where was I yesterday? Where am I going to be in a few weeks from now? With that, we also looked at the non-post-test rates, looking at as we get to that post-test at the end of the semester, we know we're collecting certain fields on our scheduled records and making sure that can we pull that information out to get a snapshot of where we stand, because then we can use that to identify quickly, are we missing post-testing students? Are we missing that the data just isn't going in, or are we missing to check a little checkbox? One other big piece that we've never had an ability to do is really to compare one program year to the next program year, to really identify whether we're moving the needle. Here now we were able to create, in working with our programmers and helping them understand what exactly we need to see as far as numbers of students enrolled, number of students who have post-tested, number of LCPs or measurable skill gains that have been earned, helping them understand what we're looking for. They were able to help us to design a report to really guide us in what's working and what's not.
Right. And I think the most critical one is that program comparison summary, because that allows us to compare 1 year to the previous year. Time, or not even year, you can put in the time. So how about we go into that one?
Well, what I'm going to do is, but without going into specifics, I'm going to try and see if we can do. Bear with me. And I'm going to jump through. And right here, what we have is we created a little talk data to meet takeaway. So a brief little takeaway that we'll make reference to later. But we also provided a snapshot of our reports. And hopefully you can see a little bit of what that report, that snapshot looks. But I think the one Yolanda wanted to make reference to is the program comparison, where we can see 1 year in our AB or in our ESOL, the number of students we had enrolled to the number of students we had post-tested to now the percentage rate.
So the number that you see up there in the first or in the second column, because the first column is the name of the program. The second column where you see ABE 525, that is the number of students that we served in ABE during the 1920 school year. And then in the third column, the 702, that is the number of students that we served in the 1819 year, right? And when I ran the report, it was from July 1st till June 30th. So that is the reporting periods that we're looking at. And so.
And I think if we're going to take anything away from this report, it's really the center two columns, the percentages, where we were looking at in our ESOL world. We went from 61.98% to 76% post-test rate. Again, we're hitting that first benchmark that the state has of that 70% post-test rate.
Well,
and then in our ABE world, we went from a 44.59% to a 69.52. Not completely there, but getting much closer. Also remember, when the state looks at post-test rate, they're looking at the combination, the collective of the two. And so we're looking them at individually, because here we have different each program is unique and each one is a different monster, for lack of better terms. But we know that the state's going to look at them combined.
Right. Keep in mind that the first two sets of columns are always the current year, followed then from the previous year, okay? So don't think that you're going from last year to this year. It's the opposite. We're going from the current, well, in this case, the 1920 backwards. And so that you can see, now this data here is strictly for the Naples area. It is not all of Colleton County, So when the state releases all of Collier County, this may go up or go down depending on how the other center that we're not responsible for does with their data. But again, you can see going back from the very beginning, we've made huge improvements back when we were like in the 20%, right? We've made huge improvements. This, we would not have been able to know or make these improvements without that data mining process and without having those other reports that we shared with you for us to be able to run.
So continuing on, and this is just a summary of what we were just talking, just all a little bit more condensed. And this is where we're looking at that 1920 school year, our projection. So this is where we believe we are as of last year's data. We're just waiting to see what we actually receive from the NRS and from the state.
Mm-hmm. And we're so tuned into our data that this past fall, when the state sent out the NRS improvement plan that we must do, right away we noticed there's some numbers here that are off. That is not where we thought we were. And sure enough, we quickly reached out to the state and they realized there was an error in the formula and they corrected it right away. But it's critical that each one of you look at your data, know your data, and question your data. Always question, question, question.
So at the end of the day, we're really, the big question is all this effort, is the squeeze worth the juice in other terms? And we believe it is, because we know that programs are doing tremendous work. Everything from at the entry level to instructional to the tail end of it. I think oftentimes we sell ourselves short on our efforts or on how well we're doing because our data just isn't reflecting it. And so this is where we're starting that conversation of how do we improve upon our systems?
Yep. So we can't wait until the state sends us our next NRS report. And usually they send that late in the fall or early the beginning of the year, right?
December, January.
Right, and so that'll be for the 1920 school year. Now, there was another question that came through, and that was about, are the gains for GED NRS 5.6?
So that's a great question. So when we're talking about measurable skill gains, we're talking, and from my understanding, we're talking about measurable skill gains in the ADE world, where we have a pre-test that was done with one form of a test. The post-test should have been done with a similar form. When we get into the GED world, the GED test is not a post-test, but in fact it's a completion. So that measurable skill gain looks a little different there.
Okay. All right.
So these are just some of the resources we use to help us organize our practices. And again, at the very top is that IPDAY resource handbook that was presented last year, critical factors that impact your NRS data. That is very comprehensive, very detailed, and a great place to start the conversation.
So thank you so much for joining us. We always welcome any questions that you may have. You may reach out to Ariel or myself, Yolanda Flores. Also, if you ever would like to join one of our online orientations, you can reach out. I know there was one particular county that joined our online orientation a couple of nights ago because they wanted to see what that process looked for. I think if we continue to share and learn from each other, we will continue to help each other move our programs forward in order to meet program outcomes and ultimately help our students be successful so that they can transition not only from our ESOL or ABE programs, but from there transition them into our CTE programs or into our programs that are available at the state colleges. So we'll turn it over to you, June.
Okay, Yolanda, Ariel, thank you so much. Am I getting feedback again? All right, here's a survey. If you don't mind taking the survey, we would, the feedback survey, we would appreciate it. All of the documents presented today will be loaded on the IPDAY website. So the recorded version and all supplementary documents shared today will be on the IPDAY website. So thank you for joining us. We hope you join us on November 4th as we discuss using the IISPs in a virtual setting. So again, thank you, Ariel. Thank you, Yolanda. Wishing you all a great rest of the day. Thank you.